Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the MVE committee on April 7th, 2022. Today we are here to send a package of responses to technical, well, we're here to do a few things. Let's review and approve the agenda first. Actually, first let's do a roll call and see who we have in the room.
We are short a quorum so far. I'm hoping that people pop in over the next minute or so.
Okay.
Uh,
Let's see, we have
our committee has shrunk to 5 people now.
so quorum is 3 and we have 2.
Right. So as soon as Jay or Todd pops in, we should have a quorum. Chell Anderson, chair of the committee.
Present.
Caroline Traub, vice chair of the committee.
Here.
Jay Arnold. Todd Bayreuther.
Here.
And now we have a quorum.
Okay, great. Thank you for showing up, everybody. We have a couple, basically 2 things on the agenda today. There is a request for opinion or interpretation, and then there is a providing recommendations. So we met a few weeks ago to discuss responses to technical comments made as part of the Energy Code CR 102 process. The TAG has made recommendations, so we're back here to decide on a response, confirming the response that they did or modifying that, and sending that on to the full council for their consideration. Some of the comments, most of the comments were to improve language or enforceability or clarity, and some of the comments were a bit more than clerical, and these have been highlighted. The goal is to provide a response to all the technical comments on the Energy Code commercial to the SBCC, which is the same goal we had last time we met. So the council can focus on the bigger decisions about code proposals that attracted lots and lots of attention in the public comment. So we can do what we want, but I recommend that to keep us on track and be most helpful to the council, we focus on the technical responses so the full council can receive a recommendation from us on technical responses that would modify code language. Just as a brief pause economic analysis, we have a meeting on April 20th. Soyan or Krista, is there any update on the economic analysis? Like a 30-second update.
Ecotop is working and the final touches they received. Well, we forwarded them everything we got, and they need a little extra time to finish it. The plan was they will finish everything by the end of next week, so the draft will be available for the work group of economic impact committee meeting for April 20th.
Okay, great. So after the last MVE, if you can remember that far back, we had kicked lots and lots and lots of technical comments to the Energy Code tag, and that group convened. So after the last MVE committee, Caroline, Krista, and I poured through each of the technical comments and provided a recommendation that you see on the documents that were posted. Most were editorial, some were clarifications, many were placed into a category for the tag to review because we felt that these were not simply correcting spelling or correcting a section reference. The tag ones were further categorized into green colored ones, meaning we felt that they should be brought up because they wanted additional technical input from the tag. Many others were labeled with a tag but with a white background. And these we felt we had a solid enough recommendation to the technical comment that the tag didn't need to discuss unless someone specifically wanted to bring it up. The tag covered all of the green issues, but we ran out of time before we got to the white issues. So we're going to run through the green issues briefly today, first when we get to that piece of the agenda, and then ask if any of the other issues need to be discussed with the recommendations changed. So if you agree with the recommendation, there is no need to bring up the issue. In the end, I'd like to have a motion to move forward with a package of technical responses to the comments with any modifications made today. We do not need to vote for the entire code package with the controversial issues, just the technical responses to the comments. Are there any questions from MVE committee members on the process or the goals of today? Okay. Then Krista, do you want to ask Jay Arnold if he's here?
Sure, Jay Arnold.
Here, thank you, Joe.
All right, and welcome. So we now have 4 out of the 5 MVE committee members present. So the first thing is to review and approve the agenda that you see before you.
This is
And
Todd.
Krista, as staff, I would recommend moving the request for opinion up above the review of tag recommendations. If the committee would like to get that out of the way first so they can spend the bulk of their time on discussions and not worry about time constraints.
That's
I move the Krista revision. This is Todd.
okay. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second for the motion, which I'm going to restate the motion. The motion is to approve the agenda as written, except that number 4 and number 5 switch has just happened on the screen. Is there a second for that motion?
Second,
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Is there further discussion? Larry? Okay. Larry took his hand down. Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda as modified, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, we have an agenda. And Larry, I'm not sure if you have a comment, or I've seen your hand go up and down a couple times. Larry,
Can you hear me?
now I hear you, yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to note that I'm here today. Larry Andrews from Andrews Mechanical.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
I guess, are there other members of the public that want to introduce themselves?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Terry Beals, representing Sound Transit on code and regulatory issues.
Okay, so let's review and improve the minutes from, well, there's no minutes available, so we can't do anything about that. Okay, so the opinion before us. Krista, do you want to provide an intro?
Sure, this was a question coming in from the city of Richland, looking at section R402.2.5, which has specific provisions for mass walls and what comprises a mass wall. And they were wondering how that worked since there were no longer any mass wall values on the R value or U value tables. So the answer to that was that those lines were removed. The mass wall lines were removed from the R value and U factor tables for the 2018 energy code, and the user would be directed to use the requirements for either the above grade or below grade walls, depending on where the mass wall was, and that they be treated no differently than any other mass walls. And in order to use the values out of Appendix A, they would need to use the U factor table. So the answer is, the question is, per the Washington State Energy Code residential, is there a required insulation R value for mass walls? As per section R402.2.5, it does not appear insulation is required. In the commercial provisions, there's a requirement in table C402.1.3 for mass walls, but it was removed from the residential provisions. The answer, the draft answer is, the intent is that mass walls follow the requirements for above grade or below grade walls in table R402.1.3. Although the IECC language was left in section R402.2.5 of the Washington State Energy Code residential, there are no insulation reduction allowances in the Washington State Energy Code as there are in the International Energy Conservation Code.
So there's the request for opinion, staff and I reviewed the answer and think it's the appropriate opinion. Are there other comments on or questions on the draft answer? We will ideally today take a motion to approve this as a building code council opinion that all other jurisdictions will be able to look at. So that's the intent today. Are there questions or thoughts or anything on this draft answer?
Can I speak or?
Yeah, Larry, your hand's been raised for a long time. So that's
Oh,
what-
I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No,
I'm
go
not
ahead.
with, I'm not with it yet, I
Yeah,
guess.
go ahead, Larry.
Okay. Has anybody reached out to the Mass Wall people about this to see what their opinion is? I mean, I would think you'd want to reach out to them to see where they're setting at on this opinion that needs to be put out, because a lot of people don't follow these opinions like a lot of us do. And it slips by the cracks. I think you'd want to reach out to those people that are involved in this and have them look at this a little bit. So you get some kind of consensus from them too. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Adam.
Yeah, so as one of those representatives from Mass Wall Industries for the Northwest Concrete Masonry Association, we would like to look at this, but I do know that the residential code does not have any provisions that allow us to utilize the mass properties for our walls right now. We just have to utilize the code required U values. So.
Okay, and Adam, I'm taking that maybe not as a specific endorsement of the answer, but the answer is technically correct.
Yes, the answer is technically correct, even though we would like to see provisions in the code that utilize the mass values.
Okay, well, you have another day or two to submit any proposed changes for the residential code in 2021. I think is it April 8th that it closes? Krista, do you remember?
Yes, that's correct. The end of the 5 p.m. April 8th.
Yep. So Adam, if you want to change the next code cycle, you are more than welcome to propose something.
Thank you.
Okay, Larry, I guess I'll re-ask if that satisfied you, that the someone from the Mass Wall industry agrees that it's a technically correct answer.
That's great. At least we had someone from their industry. I think that's important.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Okay, are there questions or comments on the question or the answer?
I don't have any. I think I would move to approve the answer as shown.
This is Todd. I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, I only actually heard one aye, but I don't know if other people heard more ayes than that. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed, say nay. Okay, all right, this passes. Thank you for that discussion. Now we'll get into the code change, the modifications based on public comment. And hopefully you're all familiar with this document, at least somewhat. So this is where we said the green ones were the ones that we wanted more technical input or thought that the technical advisory committee might have more input on it. And so we specifically brought that up at those meetings. The white ones are ones that we thought we had entirely satisfactory answers, medium priority. We did not get to those at the tag meeting. And then there are many others. So there's hundreds of responses we could review today, but we're going to start with the green ones. So I don't know, Caroline, if you want to give a really brief overview of the green part of this Mike Moore one.
Yeah, sure. So this one, I guess my takeaway was that the modifications that the tag recommended for the definition could allow for a variety of DOAS system configurations, some where the outdoor air is delivered directly to a zone independent of zone heating or cooling, or somewhere DOAS outdoor air and the terminal equipment are sharing some portion of that ductwork. So this definition is a bit more flexible, and the code allows for both of these approaches in different sections or exceptions. So this broader definition seems to make sense. I think there's a note here about other conflicts, and I think that improved alignment kind of the multiple places where DOAS is mentioned could probably be achieved in the next code cycle, but I don't think this clarification exacerbates issues that did not already exist. So I think this was a fine decision.
And we're not necessarily going to vote on each of these as we go through them. I'm just going to bring it up for any comments that anyone has on it. So this one says on it, tag recommends change as presented by Mike. Members will review DOAS language part MVE to ensure no conflict exists. So there's that's been done. No conflict exists.
I think my take on it is just that this specific change to the definition doesn't further create additional conflicts that did not already exist in the code that weren't part of other proposals. So,
okay. Kevin brought up something in a chat. Kevin, do you want to bring that up? Do you want to say something about that? He brought up, he said any value in the ASHRAE definition of DOAS at this point. I don't know how to take that. The tag reviewed this and thought it was an adequate definition. Okay, let's move on. It's the next green one. So this is the one, I guess, this is one that was discussed at the tag and had some good discussion and actually changes to the language and increased exceptions to this. So this affects heat pump requirements and was the comment by the Hospital Association, and then also Johnny Coker made a similar suggestion for change language. The tag talked mainly about the Hospital Association one and included group I2 occupancies, which is what the Hospital Association wanted to or exclude I2, included in the exception. And then it was brought up in the tag that prisons in group I3 also have similar backup power requirements, emergency backup systems. And so the tag decided to include both I2 and I3 occupancies that by regulation are required to have in place redundant emergency backup systems. So they're required to have a second fuel source. And this was felt at this point in that it was that this was going to be a burden onto hospital facilities and potentially prison facilities. So that's why this exception was included in there. Jay.
One of the interesting things that was in the discussion, not just was the redundant emergency backup systems, but the fact that the prison usage would look to another heat source to avoid ducting and things like that. Does the way this language read that it needs to be occupancies, those occupancies that are required to have emergency backup systems, or is this those occupancies because they're required to have those backup systems? I want to make sure we're not running into a problem where we're not solving the I3 issue.
I guess what I see a code language challenge here in that it's unclear if group I2 occupancies. Well, I guess could you restate your question? I'm not for your concern. I'm not entirely clear on that.
So just and maybe you're getting at what I'm trying to confirm is this group I2 occupancies period and I3 occupancies that are required to have emergency backup, or is it I2 and I3 that either of them are required to have emergency backup?
Yeah, and so if we struck and group from this, then so if it said group I2 and I3 occupancies that by regulation are required, etc., then it would be clear that does that solve the problem you're bringing up, Jay?
You may it may that the way that I would interpret that change is probably more restrictive than what I thought was intended in the discussion. And so if you're saying that the intention here is group I2 occupancies period and group I3, I'm sorry, which and I3 occupancies that are required to have redundant emergency backup systems, I think that might address the concern.
Jay, this is Todd. If I'm hearing what you're asking, so I read this as any bubble of I2 and I3 occupancies, and within those, the ones that have regulation, that's the subset, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm asking, is it a subset or is it
yeah,
apply to both? Because I don't know enough about the prison occupancy to know if it has that emergency backup requirement that solves the problem we're trying to solve.
it was brought up at the tag that it did, but we didn't reach out to the prison system or the designers of prison facilities to specifically address that. And the way I read, before I get to you, Kevin, the way I read what the Hospital Association proposed is that group I2 that are required to have in place redundant emergency backup systems would be the exception. So as Todd suggested, the bubble around I2 and I3 being the subject, and then the application being the by regulation are required to have emergency would apply to both those I2 and I3. That's the way I'd read it based on what the Hospital Association originally proposed. So it said group I2 and I3 occupancies that by regulation. I guess if you delete that second group, then it's really clear that I2 and I3 are the subject, and then I guess to me that clarifies the language a little bit and addresses Jay's comment.
Okay. And, given that we don't have that expertise, moving forward, what's the opportunity if we did hear something that prisons aren't going to be built easily. This is not a pressing issue, but what's the opportunities to clarify either through SBCC adoption or in the future if this needs to happen, just for my information.
I guess staff, do we have any? Go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah, I would also chime in that there is the other exception that exists in this section for special conditions that can be approved by the code official, and it's written as not a blanket exception. But I also do think if other specific facilities have this requirement where you need to have alternate sources of energy, so 2 entirely separate sources of fuel for a primary and secondary heating system, that hospitals have that requirement. If that requirement were to exist in other occupancies as well, I think that could potentially be an opportunity to solve that.
Okay, that's fine. That addresses my questions and concerns. Thanks. I'm good with what's on the screen.
Okay, are there any more comments on that particular piece? And then the corollary to that was that we don't adopt Johnny's suggestion as that, or public comment with the language written under there under 3 tag review, because it was about a very similar thing. Okay, and Kevin, I know you had your hand up and put it down and wanted to speak earlier, so. Okay, well, let's move on to the next green item.
Yeah, so I think this alarms section 1, the tag input was to keep that section, but to change the title of it to align with economizer and other items that use more similar language. The point being that the heat pump water heater systems, this might be helpful in detecting if the heat pump water system has an issue and it's using more electric resistance than desired. And so it's a more important part of ensuring the optimal operation of those systems. So that was the thought on this one. The next one for C407.3, I think the tag didn't want to take any action on this. I think Mike Rosenberg spoke up and noted that keeping renewables out of the carbon emissions target was very much the intent. So I think there is no action on that one. Let's see, Charlie, you want to talk about the C411.3?
Yes. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Kevin just chatted that he agreed with what I said, or that was the point he was going to make on the previous I2, I3 one. So.
Okay, just as a heads up too, at least I'm not seeing any of those chats. I don't know if he's direct messaging. Okay.
I think the way it's set up, chats can only go to a few people, and I'm one of them. So I will read the chats if I think they're relevant to the conversation and if I see them. So that was his comment. So C411 solar readiness, a solar zone shall be provided on non-residential buildings. Non-residential was struck out, and the reason is not that we are now including residential buildings. They said non-residential has a very tricky definition in the code. This code refers to being non-residential buildings, even if they include type R, because it's not single-family residential. So the tag felt that striking non-residential did not actually change the impact of the code, because because of the subtleties of the language use within the code. And therefore, the strikeout of the parenthetical comment there. So that was felt by the tag to be primarily clerical. Are there any thoughts and comments on that?
No, I guess, Chell, I did have one more comment on another item in these comments related to the Energy Star appliance items. I think it's in the link. I think it's on page 24, Krista. So this was an unresolved item from the last MVE meeting. That was the issue of specific unit types that for some reason or another might not be able to acquire the Energy Star most efficient label for refrigerators, dryers, dishwashers, and there's kind of 3 credits in a row where the same issue is arising. So this was the public comment was suggesting to just exempt ADA dwelling units. And I think Stoyan and Krista looked into this one a bit and had a couple of concerns about exempting a specific unit type. And so if you scroll up just a touch, Krista, I think the current potential edit on the table, or yeah, sorry, if you scroll back up, it has, well, it's the same for all 3 of them, but so it would be striking all and instead replacing that with not less than 90% of. And so that's language used in some of the other C406 credits as well, whether it relates to HVAC capacity or something else where it just provides a little bit of flexibility such that 100% of the systems don't need to meet the requirement, but there might just be across all of the credits, certain situations, and you don't want to not give credit just because 100% of the units can't comply. So let's see if there's any comments there.
So the recommendation, if we move forward, will be to strike all and go with 90% and strike the exceptions, or strike the proposed exceptions. Yeah, the exceptions are not part of the CR 102. They were public comments, and a response to public comments would be just to change the word all to 90%. Okay. Next, are there further comments on this?
This is Andy Burnham. Just a quick note to state that this original public comment came from one of my colleagues, and we support this revision to the 90%. I think this is a more concise way to handle it.
Thanks, Andy. Okay. All right, let's move to the next item. So these are all green items. So this one at the, well, I guess, are we talking about the C402.2.8? Is that the next one? Or are we going
Is there, can you scroll up a little bit? Is there one more at the top?
We may have scrolled past something.
Oh, no, I think it's just the general. Okay.
Multipass, is that no?
Yeah, so this one, it shows up later in the document as well. And the tag just weighed in and thought it was reasonable to change references to multipass heat pump water heater. So it was a little bit of a clearer reference. So a minor change there.
The next one, we convened a group. There was a vigorous discussion on C402.2.8. The public comment was to remove the exception for mass transfer deck slabs from this requirement for R10 thermal break in concrete slabs that penetrate the envelope. We convened a group this morning and looked at lots and lots of details and had a vigorous discussion. And we all agreed at the end that we should keep the exception for mass transfer deck slabs. If anybody wants me to rehash the discussion this morning, I'm happy to do so. Andy was also part of that discussion and can speak up on that. But if you want to know more, I'm happy to go there.
Shel, can you give a little more commentary, please?
Yeah. Yep. So there is a definition for mass transfer deck slabs, and that is where structurally a column is shifting from somewhere to somewhere else in practice, and structurally it's just impossible or ridiculously expensive to put a thermal break in that column step that is part of the exterior envelope. This C402.2.8 is about concrete slabs that are not part of mass transfer deck slabs if we keep the exception. This is about a slab that penetrates the building envelope, but could be a cantilevered deck, or it could be a simple span or something else that penetrates the thermal envelope for whatever reason. And for this, there exist products on the market, like Isocorb is the one that I'm most familiar with, that has an R10 thermal break value that can be used to achieve this. There's other methods to meet this. That's the one I'm most familiar with. And then using stainless steel rebar. Stainless steel has a third of the, or 3 times the R value of, or 3 times less conductance than carbon steel. So using those to penetrate the thermal break is kind of a reasonable thing. So Patrick provided a lot of details, Patrick Hayes, in his projects, and thought that the exception of mass transfer deck slabs should be retained. Dwayne, who proposed this language, also agreed that this exception was necessary, and everybody else on the call agreed that as well. And a side note is that mass transfer deck slabs used to require an R5 thermal break in them. They do not, because it's nearly impossible to add that R5. So in the 2018 code, they required R5. In 2021, mass transfer deck slabs do not require an R5 thermal break. That's a summary.
The one other item that I would add to that is the C402.2.8 is a prescriptive requirement, and in the prescriptive table, the mass transfer deck slabs have a footnote G that requires, if you have a mass transfer deck condition, you have to do a component performance trade-off calculation. So keeping this exception here is clarifying that if you have a mass transfer deck condition, you basically can't comply just prescriptively with the R value table. You have to do a component performance trade-off. And so it's basically just a clarification. It's not functionally changing the actual exception, because a mass transfer deck couldn't actually comply with this section anyway. Do you agree with that, Shel?
Yep. That's exactly correct. So component performance, and it gives you instructions in this section for component performance. And even if you do the energy modeling path, you still have to do a component performance in the energy code. So it basically kicks you into component performance and tells you you need to decrement your U value by a certain amount if you have this condition in your building. Larry, I did see your hand up.
Was Patrick okay with what's going on now or not?
He said we should keep the exception, which the public comment was to delete the exception.
Oh,
He agreed that we should keep the exception in there.
okay.
Patrick did.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Shel, thank you for that. And again, I'm coming in kind of high level here, but how would this preference towards one material be viewed by other materials, other solutions to these transfer situations?
Let's see. So the three structural main materials are concrete, steel, and mass timber, or wood frame in some cases.
Yeah.
So this requires concrete to include R10. It does not, this specific section does not require steel to include a thermal break. However, there are thermal break requirements for steel penetrations through the thermal envelope that are limited to a certain percentage of the envelope area. So for instance, if you did a residential building and you had lots of steel penetrations through that, that would not work with the energy code. So there's already something about steel. If you did lots of them, if you do one of them, this says nothing about that. Whereas it would say something about the concrete if you did one of them. Andy.
Yeah, I think, and just to also restate that if you have this condition, you have to do a component performance trade-off calculation, which doesn't functionally force you to meet any of these requirements. You could just as easily offset that requirement elsewhere in your envelope with wall insulation or glazing performance, et cetera. So I just wanted to also state that this is fundamentally in a trade-off compliance pathway, if that helps.
Yeah. So this specifically talks about concrete, but you also can't do lots and lots of steel penetrations through the envelope. Mass timber, there's nothing specific about mass timber going through the thermal envelope, but it's a better R value, less thermal conductance, and easier to insulate, I think, than steel or concrete.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this was adding the next one, C4 of 2.5.2. The CR 102. Wait a minute. The CR 102 included the word initially, or does not include the word initially?
Does not.
Does not.
Does not. Yeah. So the public comment added the word initially, and the tag, well, and the recommendation is that we do not include the word initially. In other words, if you keep testing units and they keep not complying, then you need to add more units to the number of units tested. Which is the way it is in the CR 102. So are there any comments on that? And then the next one clarifies that if you find that these units are not complying with the air leakage test, you don't just have to fix the one that you tested. You need to take the same corrective action or the same procedure to the other units. So if there's some sealant missing around a window, you would need to do that in all the units, or make sure it's been done in all the units. The next one, 403.1.4.
Yeah, this one was regarding exception 1, which has to do with low energy or passive house or highly insulated spaces. And the second sentence was a convoluted explanation of semi-heated spaces that would be a very rare condition and or potentially didn't make sense in light of other changes to semi-heated. And so the recommendation was to delete the second sentence because it wasn't helping to clarify anything. and the tag agreed that that deletion made sense. And then the next one has to do with exception 2. And so this proposed edit, there was 2 parts to this exception. So this has to do with dwelling units, and there originally was an exception for corner rooms versus other rooms. And what this revision does is just make it the electric resistance caps a little bit clearer. It also makes it clear that the intent is not that you can only have electric resistance in rooms with fenestration, but that you can also have a small amount of electric resistance in a room that did not have fenestration. So the intent is not that that room would have to have a heat pump, because the goal is to drive down the installed cost. And so in this specific instance, that item 3 just clarifies something that was a little bit of a kind of a gap in application. So the tag supported this modification. Okay, this next one is about the demand control ventilation section and some additional follow-up. So those edits are shown here. This first one is kind of just clerical in that both items 1 and 2 apply, not either of them. So that is the first item. The next one down is increasing the threshold at which you don't have to have DCV in a very small phone room or something where the airflow is just so small that it wouldn't make sense. And then the last edit resulting from the public comment was just kind of rewriting this exception. It doesn't change the intent of it, but just to make it clear that either of these 2 system types can have a different way to adjust outdoor air for C403.7.1.2. I think some good clarifications there.
And I'll just say that it's really great to have all the many people that spent time reviewing the code and making comments on it. It generated some great discussion, and the code will be so much clearer because of those comments and discussions.
So then the next section was a minor edit in C403.7.6 for energy recovery ventilation systems. So just the edit shown there on the screen to strike the word either and then add the word and.
And the reason why this looks like it increases stringency, but basically systems can only need to comply with one of them. And so requiring compliance with both, if I remember the discussion correctly, is the same as requiring kind of an either.
Yeah, that's right. It's not increasing stringency. It was just clarifying language. So C403.10.4, this was a public comment that did a bit of a larger overhaul on this specific section. And I think the outcome was to just retain the language as it was currently written in the CR 102. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add about
Larry,
it.
I see your hand up.
To go back there on that, and I always thought and meant both. You see, so you have this, the C403.7.6.1, and now you want to say and C403.7.6.2. So aren't you saying now by putting and in there that they have to be both instead of or? I think or would be better than and, because you're making them comply with both sections, right? When you
Well,
say,
I think in this specific case, Larry, the first section applies to R2 occupancy and the second section applies to other than group R2 occupancy. So by saying and, like, you can't be both of those things.
oh, you can't be both occupancies. Okay,
Exactly.
gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on to,
Yeah, so then C409.4.3 energy display. One was just that edit there to the very last sentence of this section to provide a bit more clarity. And the tag agreed that that accomplished that and did not change the intent of this section. So C503.4.3, alteration or replacement of existing cooling systems. I think this was a public comment related to clarity, and the commenter had offered a couple of different options. And so that highlighted version is the version that seemed to provide the most clarity. There was a small concern that the or better yet version might have changed the intent a little bit. So I think the highlighted version was the recommended one. Okay, next, section C503.5, service water heating option 2. And so this was a clarification to add this sentence that says, exception, the following equipment does not need to comply with C404.2.1. And so that is just clarifying that if you're taking one of those exceptions, you're just exempt from the heat pump requirement, but you're not exempt from the rest of section C404, which would be minimum equipment efficiency or controls requirements or other things that you would want for that replacement or altered surface water heating system that had nothing to do with the heat pump requirement. Okay, and 3 items here. So these were C406 items. So the first one there is the table you see, table C406.2, the actual credits. And there had been some TBDs for a line item for high performance service hot water temperature maintenance system. So this was giving you credit if you used a heat pump for the temperature maintenance system instead of electric resistance. And so we went back and talked to Reed Hart from P&L, and he provided these missing values, essentially making them equivalent to another type of temperature maintenance system or strategies that reduce energy use for temperature maintenance. So that gap got filled in, which is great.
and there's a methodology that was used, which is consistent across them to come up with those points.
Yeah. So this one, so throughout the CR 102, right, there's a couple items where there are options for the council to choose between. And so this option is option 1 for the C406 measure. So if the heat pump water heating section is not adopted by the full council, then a lot of heat pump water heating points become available in section C406. And so one of the concerns brought up in the tag discussion pertained to water heater systems less than 82,000 B2H or 24 kW, and a desire to ensure that those systems could get credit if they were using any type of ground source system, open loop, water source, once through, And so these edits were made here to ensure that those small systems could definitely get credit for those efficient options.
Did we want to mention the ground source open loop? Was that part of this?
Yeah, I mean, this whole section is the comments, the original public comments were a concern about whether water source heat pumps were permitted or not. And the idea being that water source heat pumps are only as efficient as the source from which they're drawing heat from. And so it really matters a lot where that heat is coming from. And so these clarifications just make it clear that only air source or ground source are permitted to earn these credits for both small systems and for large systems. And that if you have a water source system utilizing waste heat, those credits can be obtained through the prior credit. So that was I guess the overall clarification, again, on this option that only goes into effect if the heat pump water heater in the main prescriptive section is not adopted. And then the last C406 item that still had a little bit of cleanup after, or this was discussed and shown in the TAG meeting. And it has to do with the brand new C406 load management measures. So, we've had a lot of discussion about adding load to the electrical grid. And so these measures are great because they start putting technologies and controls in buildings so that we can shift load, so that if we do have load growth, utilities and owners and everybody is better prepared to move that load to different times of the day to better manage our grid peaks. And so what was kind of happening throughout this measure was some inconsistency in how designers were supposed to apply this language. And so what Reed at PNNL suggested is these edits throughout. So basically, Krista, if you scroll back up to the beginning in the charging language, up at the top here. Yeah, up a tiny bit further. Yeah. So I guess up here at the front, it would just be inserting a sentence that says, as used in this section, peak period shall be either the coincident building peak load period, the peak price period, the peak utility load period, or the peak building demand period. And so it just gives a really broad range of what that term could mean, such that from a design perspective, you could use these measures to respond to your own building peak, or if you are in a utility area where they do have time of use charges or something, you could also potentially take a signal from the utility that says, hey, shed load, and then your strategy would respond to that input. So this clarification just gives more flexibility in how designers could interpret this language. And then all the other edits in this section are really just to align with this change to the charging language.
C411, is that where we're at? So this, Mike Kennedy made comments on the C411. C411 is the solar chapter, formerly solar readiness, now kind of just solar. He made 3 different suggestions. And so three different ways to resolve some unclear language in the C411 scoping language. And the tag reviewed these, and I guess the challenge is for, the identified challenge is for buildings that do not have adequate roof area and how much solar to install on there. And so the tag looked at it, is recommended adopting option 2 with exception 3 from option 1. Option 2 requires, makes it clear that section C411.1.1 is required, and that says that if you don't install the solar on your roof, you need to get 18 more credits from the C406 credit table. And so that's the language in the C402, no, CR102. And then Mike had made a comment that if you require 18 additional credits and then you do the offsite option within the additional credits, you would actually be installing less total solar than if you had just complied with this and done the offsite solar. However, the tag found that this would potentially increase stringency, and my personal feeling is that if you require 18 additional efficiency package credits, that will take care of it. And if you did offsite solar is a growing, small but growing industry. So if you are able to get the 18 additional efficiency credits without doing offsite solar, and you're a small project and a small owner of small buildings or a small number of buildings, you might not want to enter into contracts for offsite renewable energy. So it might be easier to just do the 18 efficiency option, 18 additional efficiency credits. And the tag found that it would be probably more stringent if you required the same level for the offsite that you did for the onsite. And then the tag recommended that we include exception 3 from option 1, which covers, so exception 1 covers buildings for which more than 50% of the roof area is shaded. So that's still an exception. Number 2 includes buildings where made more than 80% of the roof area is covered by any combination of equipment, planters, vegetated space, skylights, or occupied roof deck. And then the recommendation was to also include exception 3, which says, there'll be some subset of buildings that can't install the required amount of solar, which is 0.5 watts a square foot, but don't meet exception 1 or exception 2. And so this requires those building owners to install some amount of solar that's greater than 0. And the general notion is once you install the electrical equipment to install some solar, solar costs very little to install a more full amount. So as long as you require some solar, building owners will install lots more solar on their buildings to meet exception 3. Anybody want to add anything to that or have any comments or questions? So this looks really complicated because three options to remedy the questions that Mike had are presented, and we've recommended a group of those. So Andy.
Yeah, I was just going to ask on the energy tag discussion. There was some discussion of putting in like a minimum array size backstop to help improve enforceability on the jurisdictional side, but the language that we just had up still just said non-zero. Is that non-zero language the language that got approved? Maybe I'm just misremembering the final outcome of the tag.
That's my recollection, is that we talked about some language, but in the end, we didn't agree on what that would be if it was not the language proposed by Mike. So, you know, we can, if there was language that we thought was good, we could talk about that today.
No, I don't have any other suggested technical language for today, but thinking back on it, I actually ended up changing my mind a little bit on the 5 kW minimum that we'd previously discussed, because it feels like then people just put in 5 kW and maybe not actually maximize. So I don't have any suggestions.
Okay.
Yeah, never mind. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, Andy. Larry.
I got a question. If you were to put more insulation in the building that would equal the energy that you would get off that array, would you get the same 18 points? So you reduce your energy usage by the amount of what the array would put out. Because you got to remember, when you buy the solar, it loses 0.5% every year that you own it until it gets to 0. And I didn't know if you knew that, but if you put insulation in, you don't lose that insulation value over time. So can a person get the 18 points if he insulates his building better to equal what the 5 kW array would be? Could he get the same points?
I am attempting to look that up as most expeditiously as I can. I'm a big fan of insulation, more insulation, because you get exactly one chance to put insulation in the building and you will almost never put it in.
Yeah, to me, it's the best
Later.
money spent, or better, you value windows.
I'm looking up C406. If anybody is also looking up C406 in the proposed code to see exactly what we in the CR102.
Yeah, I'm getting there. And I mean, I do want to just say that there is an enhanced envelope C406 credit that gives you points for 15% better UA. Yeah, and well, depending on the building type, it's between 5 points for Group E, but up to 24 points for Group R1 occupancies. So it's 20 to 24 for multifamily buildings and 13 points for Group B commercial type buildings. So it's in that same ballpark of the 18 credits you're offsetting.
But I hear from 5 to 24. I mean, if he only gets 5 and he has the same roof, I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, I think it should be based off energy gained. And that way you're putting both on par. Okay. If you're going to give it to the one, you should be able to give it to the other. That's my comment. Anyway.
Yeah, so
Larry, I think all of the points here are based on, energy models and trying to get that right relative impact based on what was calculated. So I think that definitely was the intent here. Chell, I had another question back to the C411 language, where if you take this exception 3 and let's say you do install a lesser amount, not 0, but you don't get up to the full 0.5, then down below, can you prorate the 18 credits so that you only have to get 13 credits if you did put in some partial amount of PV, or was that?
That's not. So my understanding of the exception is that qualify for one of the exceptions must provide offsite. We're looking, can you look at the option 2? Yeah, buildings which qualify for one of the exceptions must provide an additional 18 efficiency credit package options. So yes, so if you do not install as much solar as is required, you do need 18. There's no prorating of that. That was not brought up. It's not a bad idea if it was easy to have code language around that.
Okay. I don't have anything in this exact moment, but no, thanks for that clarification. Just curious where that landed.
And sometimes we opt for simplicity over trying to get exactly right. Larry.
I think you should have that prorating option. I mean, depending on the size of the roof, maybe the guy can only get so much. He should be given reward for doing anything he can to get better than where he was. I really think you should give the person some credit there. I mean, it only makes sense. What we're trying to do here is reduce buildings, energy loss and gain. You should be able to get something for doing that, because there's going to be different types of buildings where things just don't quite work out sometimes. Thank you.
Okay, so here's some language that we could use, which would be so do you see what I wrote up there, Krista? It's oops.
No.
Okay. It's the additional 18
There it
credits
is.
can be reduced based on a prorated fraction of renewable energy that is actually installed. Sorry, it's trying to
Should
do
say
this in
power capacity, since it's a watt metric, not a kilowatt hour production metric.
Can I chat to everybody? Oh, I can. So here's what. So Andy, what would you, or Larry, what would you modify in that potential language?
I just to clarify and consistency, I'd say prorated fraction of renewable production capacity, or are we explicitly saying photovoltaic? I guess it's not, it's just opposite. My point is it's a watts per square foot power metric, not a kilowatt hour energy metric. So we should reference a renewable capacity versus an energy.
Okay, I modified it to, I think, include.
Yeah.
So if a guy decided to put a wind generator on the top of his building, I mean, would he get credit for that if it put out 5 kW?
Well, the problem is that wind production capacity, the ratio of wind production capacity to actual kilowatt hours developed in a given year is vastly different than the installed capacity of solar and the production in a given year. So
In our area, though, actually wind's better than photovoltaic because we have so many cloudy days over in Spokane. So
yeah, we'd have to come up with something, because the capacity of wind, the ratio of actual kilowatt hours generated in a year to the production capacity is different with wind than it is for solar. So, I mean, this is the solar section. So,
okay.
I think we would.
She said renewable energy, so that's why I brought the wind in.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, I would say we're in the renewable energy section, and we do have a definition of renewable energy in the code, and I'm navigating there now. Yeah, on-site renewable energy, just renewable energy sources harvested at the site. So I've got to go down to R. Energy derived from solar radiation, wind, waves, tides, biogas, biomass, or extracted from hot fluid or steam heated within the earth. So wind would count. But again, the way that this is written, it's a watts per square foot capacity metric. So I'm not disagreeing that the annual production rates of different technology types that's obviously very, very important, but it does introduce review and enforcement challenges when you start getting into how do you verify production rates and final design versus, yeah.
How about this? I suggested some language that I think is better. Although we say 0.5 watts a square foot, which is a capacity. Yeah, so the one I just said doesn't work because, yeah, we've kind of boxed ourselves into solar because we're talking about 0.5 watts a square foot.
But you have to have a minimum of 5 kW on the roof, right? And so that wind generator would have to compute out as 5 kW. Why can't we say something like that, or prorate it based off the 5 kW minimum?
I think because the kW, the kind of peak capacity of wind, is vastly different than the peak capacity of solar in terms of the actual annual production.
But the solar is rated in a laboratory. That's not what you get out in the field a lot of times, okay?
Yeah, of course.
So you're I mean, you're going to have a field rating of what that what that wind generator can do, but you also have a laboratory rating of what that photovoltaic can do. But actual conditions, it's all going to vary. All this is going to vary depend how many clouds are out there versus on the photovoltaic, and how strong the wind's going to blow on the wind generator.
But there's like PV watts is a great estimate of annual energy. On average, it's going to be correct. I think defaulting back to the second language, which I just pasted as a fourth language, I think that works. There'll be a couple of building owners that install wind instead of solar, and then that'll be great. Then we'll know more next code cycle about how to calculate that. So I think having this fourth language would be good. What does anybody think about that language?
Sorry, Chad, can you read which version you're talking about?
Let's see. So I posted it in the chat, and I will.
Okay, I got you. 18 credits can be reduced based on a prorated fraction of renewable. I would just say capacity, maybe strike the word production.
Okay.
That is installed on site, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Strike the word actually.
It's not good code language.
Sorry.
Okay, so
can you
Caroline said remove the word production and then change actually, remove that, and then put on site after installed.
And I think it would make more sense if that sentence lived in, not in this exception, right, but down in the section where it talks about the 18 additional.
Yes, I think it would be after. It would be, so it would be in option 2.
Right.
Yes, right there after 406.2.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I think we've got good language. Krista, could you, if we approve this, Krista, could you email that to John Lang from the tag? And if he, and see if he agrees with it?
Certainly.
Thanks. I think he will, but maybe he'll have a word comment on that or something. Okay, Nathan Miller.
Yeah, so if I just want to make sure I understand, I like that text language we're adding, but then we would strike the exception that was previously there, 3, because now you don't need to tell them what to do if they can't install a full size system for all 18 points.
I didn't hear
So I'm
everything
saying,
you
do
said.
we still
but,
need exception 3 if we added that language as you just?
Are you saying we add that language to option 3 or?
No, if I can jump in, Nate, I think I disagree. You still need exception 3 to tell you that a partial array is permitted, because otherwise it's just, you have to install 0.5 watts per square foot, or you cannot install anything with the first 2 exceptions. And then you have to, this language telling you the additional 18 credits is if you're utilizing one of the not installing 0.5 watts per square foot exception. So I think you still need an exception 3 to explicitly tell you you may do a partial array. That's my take, because I think we still need exception 3.
Nathan, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
I'm just pondering.
Okay. Well, we can always come back to this. So Nathan, please feel free to raise your hand again as you ponder further. So that's the Mike Kennedy C411 one. Are there any other comments or questions on this public comment in our response to it? Okay. The next one, C411, is carbon emission. Well, no, we didn't recommend taking action on that. New definitions, single pass hot water heater, didn't we already went through that?
Yeah, that's the same comment as before.
Okay. There are some lighting ones. And we had our 3 amazing lighting people weigh in on them and come to these conclusions. And now, Chris, are we done with the green priority ones? Or is this?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, well, that's what we need, what I felt we needed to get through today. Now we'll open it up to any other recommendations that the TAG or MVE or Krista or Caroline and I made that are on this document, and anyone who would like to suggest modifications to any of those comments. So I see Larry's hand up and we'll call on him in a minute, but so we're going to take as much time as it takes to go through any of these that people have concerns about the recommendation that would go to the Building Code Council. So they're all on the table now. Larry.
I have that. On page 15, I had that tagged as green. New definitions for single pass. We had a green tag on that. I don't think we got to that yet today.
Sorry, Larry, that one is just an identical comment to an earlier green one on page 7. So it's just exactly the same thing of changing the definition.
Okay.
Just,
Thank-
yeah, using the word multipass to multipass heat pump water heater. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up.
So I'm going to leave it open for several minutes for anybody to review and make any comments on these. And then after thorough discussion of any of these, I'll accept a motion to move the entire package of technical responses to the council for their consideration. So I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes here in case anybody has any comments. I want to make sure that we address any of them, and these recommendations are thoughtful and include all the best from this group.
Just a quick note, Shell. In the
Sure.
In the tag meeting, we talked about potentially adding some provisions to the I3 and I2 and I3 exceptions to advance energy efficiency. But in thinking about that more, there just really wasn't a clean or clear path for that. And in part, that's because I think typically those occupancies depend on a dual fuel boiler running usually natural gas and the fuel oil. And it's just hard to address that usage without putting in redundant equipment, which of course is the point of the exception. So just wanted to make that note.
Thanks, Kevin. That was discussed a lot, and I'm glad you came back with that additional research.
You're welcome.
I'm going to leave it open for a few more minutes so that anybody who has further comment has ample opportunity to make it. And thanks so much to Krista for putting this all together. It's just a Herculean effort to get comments responded to from good comments from in the number in the hundreds, and Caroline for going through a lion's share of the mechanical and non-envelope ones, and then all the proponents that put these things together, and all the commenters that are making the code better for everybody, easier to follow, easier to enforce, more clear. So I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I'll entertain a motion to move this entire package, basically all the documents that were posted on the website today. Well, I guess before we do that, there were 2 lighting comments that we did not get to. And and we have somewhat of a rough draft of responses to those, but I think I want to hear from our lighting people that that's in fact what they want to do. So I guess we'll leave those TBD until the council meeting, and then actually, no, I have some direction from them. So that's what I emailed to you, Krista, I think. I think I copied you on that. So why don't we move forward with, well, I'll suggest that we move forward with the comments that are from Andrew and CJ as in response to Mike Kennedy's public comments. Discuss those today, move forward with them, and then if further lighting comments come back, we address those at the Building Code Council meeting. Will be our only other opportunity to do so. So the comments are, for the first comment here, we were recircuiting. Mike Kennedy suggests we also include C4 5.2.2 and C4 5.2.9 and others. And the suggestion from CJ and Andrew, who both agreed on this, appeared to me to suggest that we continue to exclude C405.2.2, but that we then do include C405.2.9 and C405.2.10. So that we include those in our recommendations to the council. And then for the second comment on newly created rooms, and these are newly created rooms within existing spaces with new walls that are reusing light fixtures. So it makes sense to not require or to require the limits to the amperage because we're recircuiting, but not include the requirement for luminaire lighting controls. There's another L in there as well, because that wouldn't allow them to reuse the fixtures. And the whole idea of this is you know, you're making a conference room slightly bigger and reusing the fixtures, but maybe moving them a couple of feet. Those are there's a long email from CJ, but based on that, I pulled these two recommendations out. So I guess I'll open up the comments, but those would be my recommendations, including our MVE recommendations to the council.
I think that makes sense for today, Chell. And if we learn more or that discussion continues between now and the council meeting, we could make adjustments before then. So.
Okay. Krista, is it clear to you what the recommendation is?
Yes,
Okay.
I can integrate this into the documentation.
Okay. Well, then I'll entertain a motion to move forward the response to technical comments to the full council for their consideration, including all modifications suggested and made today, including the lighting ones we just discussed.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, is there further discussion on this package? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Todd? Okay. I will also vote aye on this one. Or Todd, do you have a vote?
Hey, sorry, you can hear me. Aye. Yep.
Okay. All right. We have the ayes. I will also vote aye if that's at all important. And so it passes. We have now moved all those responses to technical comments to the council for their consideration. Thanks, everybody. Jay.
Just a newbie question. As these go to the full council later this month, what does action by the council look like? Is that yes or no on the recommendations? Is it further potential further amendments directly from the council? What's kind of the process from here, if you don't mind?
Yeah, good question. So my understanding is that this will be a package that goes to the council, and the council will consider many things at the April 22nd meeting. One of my hopes is the first one that they do is they adopt these changes into the package of codes that they are considering. So that if a vote goes forward to move the entire energy code package forward, that this is part of that, or if there's a motion to not adopt all the code language, that it will also include these editorial and clerical and other updates that we just sent to them. So the council meeting will probably be full of discussion, and there will be lots of motions made, and in the end, hopefully we got lots of codes passed, lots of really good codes passed. But people at the council can make any motions that they want, including to relook at some of the MVE recommendations if desired. Caroline.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and I guess just to put a finer point on that, right? Today, we did not make a recommendation on some of the items in the CR 102 that have an option 1 or an option 2. And so those decisions will be made by the council on April 22nd. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, we chose to look at the technical issues and technical responses to help the council so that the council can focus on the bigger picture issues and have a readily adoptable package of technical responses to comments. All right, is there other business? All right, well, it is my pleasure to adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your amazing participation in this whole process. And there's a WEI meeting upcoming, and then April 22nd is where the council will vote on these codes.
Well done, Shell, Caroline, Tag.
Nice
Thank
job.
you.
Thanks, everybody, and Krista especially. See you around.
Thank you and Caroline for all your help.
Happy to. Take care.
Bye.
Well done.